All right, so today we begin the perhaps next to last final chapter upon moving forward. Uh, if time permits, we'll go ahead and I want to say split open or cut open the thoracic cavity of your cat specimens and move forward and identify some of the structures that we'd see that are associated with what you see here. And just like a lot of the other chapters, I'd like to think about what is it that first comes to mind when you see this term or the cardiovascular system. And of course, when you see cardio, that means heart, and then vascular, it's not that it's a vague term, but it just means a type of tissue that will carry blood throughout the body. It's not being specific on whether it's carrying blood away from the heart like arteries do, or bringing blood back to the heart like veins do, or capillaries in that sense either, those that are one cell layer thick to where your blood gases diffuse through and deliver those needed gases to your man, I'm struggling here. Deliver what's needed to your cells, whether it's oxygen for cellular respiration or removing that carbon dioxide, and so it can be exhaled from the body from for respiration that's produced as essentially a waste product. And then what's the right word I'm looking for? Diffusion, because it diffuses across that one cell layer thick membrane. So when we talk about the most important portion is going to be the pumping mechanism, okay? And as you would guess with humans, with this four-chambered heart, we'll pump this blood throughout the body. Of course, the arteries are the largest, and they're essentially oxygenated. And that's where the pressure is going to be the highest, especially that which you would guess coming out of the largest artery being that of the aorta. And then what happens is that aorta reaches the top portion. It's the aortic arch or ascending aorta. Then as that turns, it's going to go downwards through your thoracic cavity, and then through your diaphragm, where the bottom of your thoracic cavity meets the top of your abdominal cavity. And again, that continues and goes down into your groin area, where it will then split into what we call common iliac arteries and smaller structures even still down into your femoral area, then the tibial and fibula arteries, and then all the way down to your feet. Of course, that's going down, and there's still going to be arteries all the way down, probably, I would say, not until it starts branching off of those structures that we had just mentioned, because again, in size, those arteries are going to be quite large. And I just have one of the pens that I use. It's one of those that you notice that I use from correcting with different colors. This being, I don't know, I would say 3/8 of an inch thick or so. That's still going to be a fairly decent sized artery. Your arterioles is where that's going to branch off and supply blood to, let's say, your stomach, that of your liver, your kidneys, spleen, and every time that you see these structures branches off of that main highway, if you want to call it that, you're going to go into smaller structures called arterioles. Okay, so it just means smaller in diameter, of course. And then the next stop is what's going to link your arterioles to that of your venules. And it's just opposite direction going back to the heart, where you have 5 different size structures of vessels. Okay, arteries and arterioles is 2. The middle range here, where you're going to have still oxygen and then collecting carbon dioxide. That's why we're talking about diffusing blood gases. That's the third structure. Venules would be 4. And then those are smaller diameter blood vessels or veins. And then finally, the largest of that would be those of your veins, where you don't have much pressure associated with veins. And that's why, for those of you who have donated blood, when they are taking that needle and poking into, per se, depending on which arm you had picked, I think they'll still have a choice of whether they want to do your radial vein or your ulnar vein. And one of the things you would notice, we talked about that when you're dissecting your cat. When you got down underneath that of the biceps femoris, okay, you'll notice that sometimes a lot of these vessels, not just our arteries, but veins and even that of nervous tissue, they all jumble those together or combine them into the bone structure that might be within that area. That's why you have a femoral artery, a deep femoral artery, the femoral nerve, and then same thing when you're talking about these structures right here. On the outside you have your ulnar vein, and the outside you have your radial vein, and on the inside you would have your ulnar vein. Okay, and again, the reason that blood is collected there is because the pressure is much less. Okay. So as we had just mentioned, veins being the largest deoxygenated vessels that returns blood back to the heart. Now, one of the aspects that we want you to keep in mind is one of the trick questions that we always like to ask is that, are all arteries red and are all veins blue? And the reason that we call that a trick question is because the answer to that would be no. And when we get to what we call the pulmonary circuit, which means it's just one half of what we're talking about, because we're talking about a double circuit, this just being half of it. And remember, this meaning that of the heart, okay? The blood that is oxygen depleted is sent to the lungs for gas exchange, and that's why we call that the pulmonary circuit. If you were paying attention earlier, I had said pulmonary meaning heart. No, pulmonary means lungs, okay? So cardial means heart, okay? So when we're talking about the pulmonary circuit, that means the structures of the lungs. And for those of you who are lifeguards, that would make sense, because when you are taking your CPR test, the C meaning cardio, the P meaning pulmonary, and then the R meaning resuscitation. And that's why when you utilize that term P meaning pulmonary then, okay? So what that means then is that even though, okay, it's oxygen depleted, that's one of the clues to keep in mind, okay? It's going to be a blue artery, okay, because it lacks oxygen. So it's going away from the heart, okay? So that makes it an artery, and it's oxygen depleted, so that's what makes that a vein, okay? Or excuse me, that's what makes it blue, okay? So it's a blue vessel that's oxygen depleted, because it has to go back to the lungs so you can exchange those blood gases. So that will probably or perhaps make more sense when we look at some of these diagrams that will go further in depth upon when we return back into school on next Tuesday. Now, I think I made a correction on the side of the board where I keep the track schedule. I believe it was the seniors that had mentioned that at that time they believed it was a 10 o'clock dismissal, but talking with Coach Preheim, it may be a little earlier than that. That might be a 9 o'clock dismissal next Tuesday, that of the 11th. But nonetheless, we'll get more information coming forward referring to different identifications that you need to know for whether it's the heart structure itself or a lot of the veins and arteries associated with the cardiovascular system. Okay, so this double circuit, half of it being that of blood that is depleted, sending it to the lungs, so gas exchange can take place. So that's half of it. Then we look at, oh, why is this mouse not working? I wanted to click this because I don't have my slide presenter with me. So I got to go walk back and forth to this computer here. It's just kind of inconvenient. Well, there it went. Now I guess it likes to be right next to the computer. Oh, wow. Okay. So here's the other half of the double circuit. Okay. And what we mean by systemic then, it just means you're sending this oxygen-rich blood now to the rest of your circulatory system. So that's what makes that the systemic circuit then. And that's probably one of your vocab terms that you'll notice that's in your packet that was handed to you. One of them might be a pulmonary circuit, and the other might be that of the systemic circuit. And then this is how you put that terminology together. Is that now after blood has returned to the heart, it's oxygen depleted. So then through the pulmonary circuit, it's going to send that blood to the lungs where you're going to exchange, get rid of the carbon dioxide, take in the oxygen, then that comes back to the heart in the pulmonary circuit still, because that means to the lungs and back. That's a circuit then. Now that we got all this oxygen-rich blood inside of our heart now you're going to send it to the rest of the systems, whether digestive system, nervous system, what did I say, nervous, I just said nervous system, skeletal system, and endocrine system, well, not endocrine system, but any different types of the systems that we would associate with needing oxygen-rich blood. Okay. Let's see what we have next. Again, since this is from home, I try to be conscious and aware of. I see we're up to 12 minutes, and it's not the best way to keep moving because I don't think you like learning in this way, and I really don't like administering the content this way. But this is the best that we can do. Okay. I think with this slide, and then I think that would probably be good. We'll start talking about the different types of coverings of the heart upon when returning back to school. Okay, so the size of the heart, typically what happens, okay, is you could say by the time you become an adult, you can make your fist about like this, and that's about the size of what your heart is going to be. Okay, now that's when you're an adult, but when you are growing up as an infant then, okay, I would venture to think that at about 3 months of age, your heart's just not going to be that big, okay, because it doesn't have to be, because there's just not a lot of blood to essentially pump throughout the body, and that's why the heart doesn't have to be that big. Okay, so that's why we say it will vary with size as we develop. Okay, so then one of the aspects that we'll ask you students is that, why don't you ask Mr. Paulson then, should someone have to have some work done on their hearts, there is different types of tissues that we can take from an animal. Okay, it's actually a barnyard animal that works very well because their heart is very comparable to ours. It's probably almost indistinguishable what type of animal that you might get valve structures to maybe replace the mitral valve, which is I believe in between the right atrium and right ventricle, I believe is your mitral valve. It's also called the bicuspid valve, okay? Or no, I'm sorry, tricuspid. It's the bicuspid is actually on the left side. Tricuspid is actually on the right, okay? So now that you had time to process that, and maybe Mr. Paulson has heard this, one of the aspects, it's actually a pig's heart that it's been known to, surgeons will take different types of, like I said, valves out of a pig's heart and place it into a human's because it is so comparable. Now, the reason that's possible is you're not taking the entire heart out of the animal. Because one of the reasons that would not work is because your immune system is just going to attack that structure. Okay, when it's just that of a valve, for some reason, I don't know if you'd have to have immunosuppressants with that, but I know my aunt had that done, and this was actually back in the 1980s, I believe, going back that far. Because what had happened is when she was very young, she had rheumatic fever, and because of that, her bicuspid valve, okay, or not the bicuspid valve, mitral valve, that just eventually went bad in her heart, and it had to be replaced, so they actually took it out of a pig's heart and then replaced that. Okay, so one of the things that I would like to go over is parts of this systemic circuit, and you have to bear with me, and maybe it's better that we would have the book and all be together in class, but we're just doing the best that we can with this opportunity. So what we will do here is just very briefly, okay, is we can shut this guy off for now, and I think this will still show up all right on here. Okay, so let's see here. And again, that heart is located what's called the mediastinum or mediastinum, and it's just a little bit on the, I would say, to the left side underneath your sternum. Okay, it's not exactly halfway in between both sets of lungs, and when you look at the internal anatomy with the heart and the lungs, there's actually only 2 lobes of your left lung and 3 lobes on your right lung, just because that heart is not just located exactly in between them. That's why you only have, again, 2 lobes in your left lung and 3 lobes in your right. Okay, so what we see happening, okay, let's see how well this works. Okay, and then, yeah, I think that would work. Okay, that maybe should have been over just a little bit, because you're not going to see the structure. It's not exactly all the valves are going to be the same size. That's just not how the man upstairs had designed us. Okay, and there's a specific reason for that. Let's see here. I'm not drawing that right. There we go. That's probably fairly accurate. Okay, and one of the things you got to be conscious of, remember, you are looking at a mirror image. Okay, which means like if you took both of your hands and made a mirror image, that one is superimposable on the other. And the reason that something like that is important is once you do this, okay, or look at it this way, just like when I'm talking in class, it looks like you're looking at the same thing, but once you take this off, well then, of course, you got your thumbs pointing in, and then you have your sorted appendages like this. So, so anyway, when you're looking at this mirror image, just like when we're in class, it's one of those things, I know that this is my right side, okay? But when we're talking in class, I'll say left side, do we understand this? Because again, you're looking at that mirror image. So this is just the same type of idea, okay? This is not the right atrium, okay? This is the left atrium, okay? That makes this the right atrium, okay? Then, of course, this is the right ventricle, and then this is the left ventricle, okay? And one of the things that, of course, the proportion isn't as what it should be, because the ventricles are much larger than the atria, but you get the idea. The biggest take-home picture for this is this has to be the biggest structure in the heart, the left ventricle. And one of the things that we'll talk about later on is because it's the workload that this chamber has to do, because this is part of the systemic circuit. If you remember, that means you're sending blood to the rest of the body. So not only is it just supplying itself in its own tissues? There's vessels that come out of here, remember the aorta, and that's going to branch off and send blood up to your heart, okay? And not only that, but then also when the aorta starts to descend or come downwards, I don't know if I have really good red markers here. I can try this one. Because what happens on the back side there, okay, well, this one doesn't work at all. Okay, well, I'll try this one. Well, strike two. Okay. Okay. So again, and I know it's not coming out of the right atrium. We're just trying to make sense of this. And I would suggest not drawing this. There's better pictures in your book. It just helps me explain this content to you. Okay. So this is the largest artery in the body. Okay. You have this ascending aorta, which means from here up to here. That's what the aorta is doing. It's going up. Okay, I better keep an eye on this. And then once it gets up to the top, okay, this is the aortic arch. I'll just abbreviate that. Okay. Then once it starts to turn and go downwards, okay. Now, this arrow is not for this side. It's over here where that aorta is ascending. Then once it gets over here, it is descending. So this is the descending aorta. Then I would say maybe approximately, I think maybe the heart actually rests on the diaphragm. So then this is the thoracic aorta. And once it goes through the diaphragm here, now you're into the abdominal aorta. Okay? So part of the pulmonary circuit now means it has to go to that of the lungs. So I'll make that perhaps this color here. Okay, and here you have a lung, then you have a lung on this side. Okay, and then you have blood coming back from the rest of the body, and that's going into your right atrium. And again, this is still part of the systemic circuit. Systemic. This one over here is systemic because it's sending blood to and from the rest of the body. It's once you have blood leaving this right ventricle, that is your pulmonary circuit. Okay, so this is pulmonary circuit. Okay, and it's going over this one too in the pulmonary circuit. Okay. Good thing I ran out of room, because if I had to keep going, you might think this was a circus instead of a circuit, but we get the idea. But that's why this system is so complex. It's got a double circuit, okay? Blood is coming back, that's oxygen poor. It's coming into the right atrium, okay? It will drain down into the right ventricle, and then it goes to the pulmonary circuit, so blood can go to the lungs, have exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, return to the left atrium, still in the pulmonary circuit, go down into the left ventricle, and then be pumped to the rest of the body. The only thing that we're missing here is where this gets to be a little tricky. I think this is what's called your brachiocephalic trunk, where here you have your left common carotid that branches off over here, and then your right common carotid branches off of here. Just a strange way on how these arteries branch off of the aorta, and we'll get more into that as we move further down this chapter. Okay, so that's a brief introduction. It's maybe not the best, but it gives you hopefully a good start on what's going to be ahead of us. All right, so enjoy your Easter break, and we will catch up to you next time.